State for Housing, Community and Local Government, I call Minister Simon Clarke to answer the substantive question from Neale Hanvey, who is participating virtually. Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And with your permission, I will answer this question together with questions 2 and 3. This government believes in respecting the results of democratic referendums. Leaving the European Union has provided us with an opportunity to align the objective of the EU structural funds with domestic priorities, whilst continuing to support vital jobs and growth opportunities across the United Kingdom. The new UK Shared Prosperity Fund will be our vehicle for delivering this. UK government officials regularly speak to their counterparts in the devolved administrations about this and other issues.
We now go up to Scotland to Neale Hanvey. Neale Hanvey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This vague waffle on timelines and content just won't cut it. The UK has received over €10 billion since 2014 as an EU member, and structural funding is now staring at economic disaster with no information on what will replace these funds. Will the Minister guarantee today that the Shared Prosperity Fund will not result in areas like Fife seeing any reduction in levels of funding?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The 2019 Conservative Party manifesto committed at a minimum to matching the size of EU structural funds in each nation. It's very important that we get these decisions right. This is, after all, an enormous sum of money, our money, sent to us formally to the EU and then top-sliced and sent back to us with conditions. I very much look forward to controlling it for ourselves.
Alan Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's not just the Scottish Government that's looking for clarity on this. Just last week, the Institute of Fiscal Studies published a report that said, and I quote, "It is high time, 4 years after the Brexit vote, that we had some idea of where the Government is going with this." Would the Minister agree with me, the Scottish Government, the Welsh Assembly Government and the Northern Ireland Assembly Government that it's high time we had clarity on these schemes?
Minister.
Well, I thank the honourable gentleman for his question. It's obviously important we provide that clarity. I wholly agree with him, and we are going to provide that clarity after the cross-government spending review in the autumn.
Right, let's come to Stephen Flynn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The report highlighted by my colleague from Stirling did not end in its criticism there. Indeed, the IFS went on to say that it was disconcerting that the Shared Prosperity Fund was still not finalised, and suggested that, with limited time left, one option the Government could consider would be to continue with existing EU funding allocations for one more year. So will the Minister today commit to do just that, to protect all our communities and ensure that they are not left behind by this incompetent UK Government?
Well, I thank the honourable gentleman for his question. Obviously, I wouldn't accept his characterisation of the Government. We are working very hard to make sure that we deliver on the result of the decision to leave the European Union, and we will be in a position to give full details on the UK Shared Prosperity Fund after the cross-government spending review, which will be so important to determining so many aspects of our future relationship with Europe, as well as obviously our commitments to our own financial spending priorities. We will continue working closely as one United Kingdom to understand the changing needs of local and regional economies, and I'm obviously happy to meet with ministers from the Scottish Government to find an acceptable way forward.
Two questions for SNP spokesperson David Linden.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. 5 months before the transition period ends, and there's still lots of talk from the Government about future funding arrangements, but no details. Now, last month the Minister told me that he would make inquiries on this, yet his response only promised more details in due course. Does the Minister not agree and appreciate that communities cannot afford to wait in perpetuity and need clarity on this now?
Well, my officials meet fortnightly with those of the Scottish Government, and it's obviously very important we maintain that dialogue. As I indicated in my reply to the honourable gentleman for Aberdeen South, we are absolutely clear that we are prepared to have talks at ministerial level with our Scottish counterparts. We want to provide that clarity. We'll be in a position to do so when we've had the spending review, which will detail our commitments in the round.
Right, David Linden.
I'm very grateful, but Mr. Speaker, endless meetings don't give answers to communities and local governments who actually do need that information and clarity. Another issue is the Stronger Towns Fund. That's an area where the Government has had lots of self-congratulatory backslapping from the Tory backbenches, but very little in terms of detail. Now, in the departmental spending debate and the estimates earlier this month, there was still no detail forthcoming in that. So will he today advise when Scotland will receive details on the funding and timeline for the Stronger Towns Fund?
Well, the Stronger Towns Fund is a vital part of our work levelling up, and I make no apologies whatever for saying I think this is a really important tool to rectify long-standing economic imbalances within the country. The Barnett formula will be applied in the normal way to Investment for England at the spending review. This funding is committed to the devolved nations, and this means that the governments in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland will receive a share of funding with allocations to be confirmed in the next financial year.
Siobhain McDonagh.
Question number 6, Mr Speaker.
Minister Hall to answer.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The Homelessness Order 2012 and the Homelessness Code of Guidance sets out that local authorities should try to place households within the area, and that when this is not possible, they should place that household as near as possible. This should be a last resort. If a local authority places a family outside the area, they are required by law to notify the local authority in the area in which they are placed.
How does the law work without enforcement? What we know from the Ross Kemp programme, Living With, is that homeless families travel approximately 400,000 miles each year, or 16 times round the globe, in order to get to their temporary accommodation, with 60 councils not informing the receiving authorities. That's reality. What is the government going to do about it?
Minister Hall.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And can I thank the Honourable Lady? I know that this is an issue that she cares passionately about. She's raised it in the House recently. If a local authority does place household into temporary accommodation in another area, as I said, they're required by law to notify the local authorities to ensure there's no disruption in schooling or in employment. Our homelessness and advice support team should hold local authorities to account when for their performance on this matter, and the Local Government Association are doing work with local authorities from London and around the country to develop a protocol for out-of-area placements. But we are clear from this front bench that council should be adhering to this basic legal requirement.
Simon Jupp.
Question number 7, Mr Speaker.
Fine, we come to Secretary of State.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And with your permission, I will answer this question together with questions 8, 9 and 10. Our £3.6 billion Towns Fund will drive the economic regeneration of towns to deliver long-term economic and productivity growth. The Towns Fund will play an important role in supporting our country's economic recovery, bringing forward public investment to create jobs and to boost confidence in towns, as well as levering in investment from the private sector.
Simon Jupp.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The beautiful towns across East Devon boast many independent shops on our high streets, providing the customer service you just can't get with a click of a mouse. As we reopen our high streets safely and encourage people to think local first, the government must press on with plans to regenerate our town centres. What plans does my right honourable friend have for the next phase of the Future High Streets Fund?
Well, my honourable friend will be pleased to hear that we will set out our plans for a competitive round to the High Streets Fund, and the Towns Fund rather, later this year. As I said to him when I visited Exmouth with him last year, it is the kind of town that the fund was designed to serve, and I very much look forward to seeing their submission. In terms of immediate investment, the Heart of the South West LEP will receive £35.4 million from the Getting Building Fund for shovel-ready projects across the area, including in Devon, and we will announce 160 successful projects from across England at the end of this month.
Tom Hunt.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Ipswich's town centre is at the heart of life in our town, but it faces many challenges that have only been made greater by COVID-19. A great deal of work is going into developing a coherent strategy to regenerate our town centre, with the input of both private and public sectors under the Ipswich Vision Partnership. Will my right honourable friend recognise the excellent work that has gone into developing Ipswich's strategy for our town centre, as he considers our proposed timetable for receiving the £25 million of town deal funding in October this year?
Secretary of State.
Well, I'm delighted that the ideas developed over the past several years by the Ipswich Vision Board are being used as the foundation for Ipswich Town Deal. My officials are looking forward to receiving Ipswich's proposals in their town investment plan that, as he says, is being submitted on the 30th of October. We've also recently announced that Ipswich, like other towns who are recipients of the Towns Fund, can apply to my department for up to £1 million to kickstart their work, create jobs, boost confidence and help their local economy to recover.
Let's wander up to see Mark Logan in Bolton. Mark Logan.
Bolton has shovel-ready town centre regeneration schemes, including Le Mans Crescent and Church Wharf. Uncertainty created by COVID-19 means that financial backers are looking to the government to act as guarantor of last resort. Will my right honourable friend agree to meet with me and the leader of Bolton Council to discuss ways to help support these well-developed regeneration plans, as I'm sure he'll concur with me that Bolton is ready to be the epicentre of this government's levelling up agenda?
Minister.
Well, I congratulate Bolton and my honourable friend for the very impressive work that they're doing with the council to transform the town. They are one of the initial 100 towns selected to submit proposals for a town deal, and again I look forward to seeing their submissions shortly. As I said in my previous answer, Bolton can also apply to the department for an advance of £1 million from the town deal to fund some of those projects which he describes. And I also understand that as a result of Bolton being part of the future High Streets Fund, it is likely to include support for Trinity Gateway, Le Mans Crescent, Church Wharf and Crompton Place, a number of extremely important regeneration projects.
Sir Ritliff.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Accrington Town Centre is one of the many places that has been left behind for too long. It's at the heart of my community, and now that I'm the Member of Parliament, I intend to be the strong voice that is needed to make sure that it's not a forgotten town anymore. Yeah. So will the Secretary of State accept my invitation to visit Accrington and our amazing local businesses to discuss with me how I can make sure it gets the investment that's so desperately needed?
Well, I would be delighted to accept my honourable friend's invitation to Accrington, and from what I've seen in her relatively short period in this House, she is exactly the strong voice that her constituents deserve. I can say that we have shown consistently through our initiatives like the Towns Fund that we've been discussing, like the High Streets Fund, our commitment to levelling up all parts of the country, and we're doing that once again with our £900 million Get Building Fund, £34 million of which will benefit her constituents in Lancashire, and I look forward to announcing with her local LEP those projects by the end of the month.
Now visit Shadow Minister Naz Shah. Naz Shah.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does the Secretary of State agree that the provision of appropriate community spaces and opportunities in town centres can be crucial to social cohesion? During decades of austerity, our communities have lost so much of their town centres. So can the Secretary of State tell me what steps are being taken to ensure that any town centre regeneration plans are drawn up with the help of the community members to ensure the community is prioritised and benefited, including through jobs and social spaces?
Secretary of State.
Well, I agree with the Honourable Lady that we need to invest in our town centres and our high streets. The government had begun that work even before the pandemic created so much additional economic disruption. The Towns Fund, the High Streets Fund, these important initiatives will help local communities to set a course for the future with investment in infrastructure, in town centre regeneration, in skills and in culture. And local people are at the heart of each and every one of those town deal or high street bids.
Secretary of State, we have a question from Peterborough, substantive.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The government is investing around £150 million in infrastructure projects in Northamptonshire, unlocking the development of over 19,000 homes. In Corby, East Kettering and at the A43, for instance, the government is supporting schemes with almost £80 million, which will together unlock over 12,500 homes. This is part of over £10 billion of investment in new infrastructure for housing across England.
So head to Wellingborough with Peter Bone. Peter Bone.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, that's wonderful news from the Secretary of State, but he sort of missed out one constituency in North Hampshire, and that was Wellingborough. We're planning to build lots of new houses at Wellingborough North. But to realise the full potential of this housing, we have to have the Isham bypass. So why can't we get that bypass? It seems to be held up by red tape. So would the Secretary of State agree with me that the Isham bypass would be an excellent project for the Prime Minister's Project Speed? And let's get the bypass built.
Secretary of State.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, we want to fast-track major building projects in all parts of the country to fund, to fuel the economic recovery, to create jobs, and Project Speed is just one part of that. With respect to the Isham bypass, I understand the Department for Transport has prioritised the project for major road network funding. Northamptonshire County Council is due to submit an outline business case later this year. The Council has had to amend the route and will require fresh planning permission and legal orders. But the Department for Transport's officials are in touch with the Council to discuss how best they can take forward the scheme. And if there's anything that my department and my officials can do to assist the honourable gentleman, we obviously will.
Tonia Antoniazzi.
13, Mr. Speaker.
Minister Pincher.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We are committed to bringing forward legislation to deliver a better deal for renters, including repealing Section 21 of the Housing Act 1988 as a priority, because this will represent a generational change to tenancy law in England. So it's only right, Mr. Speaker, that such legislation is considered and balanced to achieve the right outcomes for the sector, for tenants and, of course, for landlords.
Tonia Antoniazzi.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The economic consequences of COVID-19 could continue for years to come. So, with the Secretary of State's commitment that nobody should lose their home because of coronavirus, would the Minister agree with me that it is about time this government look at the measures the Welsh Labour government are putting in place to protect renters from eviction by unscrupulous landlords?
Minister Pincher.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm obliged to the Honourable Lady for her question. This government has brought forward an unprecedented array of measures to support tenants through the coronavirus epidemic. We've protected 8.6 million households because of our actions. We've increased the LHA to the 30th percentile. We've given local authorities £500 million of crisis grants. We've introduced the furlough scheme, what the Shadow Chancellor in a moment of lucidity described as a lifeline. This government is acting and will continue to act for tenants.
Shadow Minister Devon.
But, Mr. Speaker, the evictions ban ends on the 23rd of August, and the government could have already brought in this bill, or raised local housing allowance temporarily to average rents, or scrapped Section 21 already, or given courts discretion in arrears cases, and they haven't done any of those things. And thousands of people are struggling with rent now. So will the Minister guarantee to honour the words of the Secretary of State in March, and I quote, "No one should lose their home because of coronavirus"? Yes or no?
Mr. Pincher.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I know the Honourable Lady is coming under some pressure from her extreme left wing to essentially write off all rents. I'm not entirely sure who that is expected to help, certainly not those people who are working very hard to pay their rents. As I said earlier, Mr. Speaker, the government has brought forward an array of measures to support hard-pressed renters. We have introduced measures that will support those people, and my right honourable friend, the Lord Chancellor, I think is about to introduce a measure that will make it very difficult for those landlords who do not bring forward good cause in bringing their application to court by describing what the effect on their tenants is going to be of an eviction. Then the courts will be able to adjourn those actions. That is practical support for people on the ground, not pie in the sky from the Honourable Lady.
You Merriman.
Question 15, please, Mr. Speaker.
Secretary of State.
My department has brought forward a range of measures to support the safe reopening of high streets across England, including providing flexibility for outdoor dining, which has helped to create a alfresco dining renaissance in this country, enabling businesses to operate on takeaways, making it easier to hold outdoor markets, pedestrianising town centres and high streets to support local businesses. And this, Mr. Speaker, is in addition to the government's VAT cut for hospitality and the Eat Out to Help Out scheme and the £50 million Reopening High Streets Safely Fund.
Merriman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And can I say to the Secretary of State and his Housing Minister that they're welcome for a bit of alfresco dining down in Bexhill and Battle whenever they're around. Can I also pay credit to both of them in the way that they have helped reform the planning system so that high streets can reopen? Can I ask them if they will take further steps, should they be required, and with particular regard to temporary structures, which I believe could get some help with permitted development rights if that was so needed. Thank you.
Well, I'm grateful to my honourable friend for those kind words, and we are certainly open to further measures that we can take to make the lives of small business people across the country easier as they seek to recover their own businesses and livelihoods after the pandemic. And in particular, I can give him reassurance that the existing legal framework, which enables one to put up a temporary structure for 28 days, is being extended to 56 days during 2020 to enable, for example, a pub to put up a marquee, a restaurant to do the same, or a market to operate for longer than they would ordinarily do, all designed to help local businesses to prosper in the weeks and months to come.
16 withdrawn, so we come to Shadow Secretary Steve Reid.
I'm grateful to Mr Speaker for allowing me to ask the supplementary despite my honourable friend being otherwise held up. Does the Minister recognise that after all government funding is taken into account, including the emergency funding, councils still face a funding gap of between £6 to £10 billion, and of course they're required by law to balance their budgets in year and take appropriate measures to ensure that happens? So how many jobs does he estimate will be lost as councils are forced to make severe cuts to plug this gap?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Our engagement with councils has enabled us to understand pressures at a national and local level across England, and to date we've announced £4.3 billion worth of additional resource for councils, including £3.7 billion of unring-fenced funding. We've also announced a sales fees and charges co-payment scheme to compensate for irrecoverable income loss that's designed to flex according to the extent of those losses as they crystallise. We will also extend the period over which councils must manage shortfalls in local tax income relating to this financial year from 1 year to 3 years. All of those measures are intended to prevent councils from having to make difficult in-year decisions, and I would reiterate the message I've sent out countless times now to individual authorities, which is that any authority facing an unmanageable situation should make contact with my officials.
Alex Cunningham.
Number 18, please.
Minister Clark.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My department has been working closely with the Joint Biosecurity Centre and the Department of Health and Social Care to develop the framework for the local management of further outbreaks of coronavirus, and councils will play a crucial role in this process. All upper-tier local authorities have published their local outbreak control plans, and I'm in regular contact with my counterparts at DHSC. We gave new powers to councils to control local outbreaks of COVID-19 that came into effect just this Saturday.
18 of 55 patients who tested positive for coronavirus were transferred from North East Hospital into local care homes between the 1st of March and the 15th of April. This was directly in line with government advice, which said a negative test wasn't required before discharge. A further 366 were transferred without a test. The policy changed on the 16th of April, but does the Minister accept that many deaths on Teesside and perhaps thousands across the country could have been prevented if the government had got it right in the first place?
Minister.
Well, I pay enormous tribute to the care workers on Teesside and, of course, to our local NHS, which we share as Teesside MPs. This has been a constantly evolving and very complex situation. I think governments around the world, including our own, have obviously learned as matters have progressed. What I would say is we've acted consistently in good faith throughout. We've worked very hard with the care sector to protect patients, and obviously the £600 million infection control fund, which we've instigated, is designed to ensure the care sector is safe and a strong measure of containment against disease for patients going forward.
Let's head to the Church Select Committee. Clive Betts. Clive Betts.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The Minister may not know, but on the 1st of June, following his appearance at the Liaison Committee, I wrote to the Prime Minister about local authority involvement in tackling this virus. And in particular, I said, could you give an assurance that data will be fully shared with all partners, in particular directors of public health? Now, I haven't had a response to that letter, but what I have had from Greg Fell, the Director of Public Health in Sheffield, and other directors, is the fact that they're only getting generalised data. They're not getting on a daily basis the names, addresses and NHS numbers of those infected and those who they've been in contact with. Does he accept, therefore, that while this information is held by Public Health England, it needs to be passed on to Directors of Public Health, it needs to be passed on quickly, and would you give an assurance that that will happen this week?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Since the 24th of June, all local authorities have been able to access postcode level testing data through their Director of Public Health, which is securely shared by PHE on a weekly basis. And I understand that that's been going on pretty much from the moment that became available. PHE also shares information with local Directors of Public Health as part of the routine investigation of outbreaks and incidents. That includes information on individual cases and their contacts as required to support the public health response.
Right. We have Shadow Minister Kate Alone.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Health Secretary quite rightly praised my local council of Blackburn for their efforts to bring down infection rates, and I will quote, "On Blackburn, I think the council are doing a fantastic job. They've taken steps locally and I applaud that. This is exactly the sort of local action we want to see." And though Councillor Khan welcomes the praise, as do the communities who've worked closely with the Council through this difficult time, does the Minister recognise that they've been failed by the test and track system? And I did raise that in this House last week. Data made available to me over the weekend shows that only 43% of people from the National Service have been contacted successfully. And does he accept that the additional burden on the Council requires resources to help keep services running and keep our community safe now? They need the funding now. And finally, will the Minister agree to meet with myself and Councillor Khan to discuss the challenges going forward?
Minister.
Well, I thank the Honourable Lady for her question. It's obviously very important we get control of the situation in Blackburn, and PHE and NHS Test and Trace are actively working with Professor Harris and his colleagues there to ensure a rapid solution is implemented to support their local work. Clearly, this is precisely why we've allocated £300 million to support the wider Test and Trace programme. We're also supporting Professor Harris and his team with additional mobile testing capacity and a local visit in order to better understand how the needs of the community in Blackburn can be supported. I'm obviously very happy to have a meeting with her and Councillor Khan to discuss how we take this forward, as I have with a number of other authorities in a similar situation.
Substantive question to Secretary Jenrick from Sheerman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Our proposed future home standard will ensure all new homes from 2025 will result in at least 75% lower carbon emissions than those built to the current standard. Earlier this month, the Chancellor announced £8.8 billion of new infrastructure, decarbonisation and maintenance projects, including a £3 billion green investment package, which could help support around 140,000 green jobs and upgrade buildings and reduce emissions.
Visit the member for Huddersfield, Sheerman. Sheerman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I urge the Secretary of State to look at the letter from 18 conservation groups, deeply worried this morning by the fact that they believe that the planning system is going to be radically deregulated? Would you not agree that we want sustainably built homes in sustainable locations? And would he talk to the DEFRA Secretary and get his act together over this suggestion there will be no more environmental impact assessments worthy of that name?
Well, I can give this assurance to the honourable gentleman that the planning reforms that we intend to bring forward in the weeks ahead will not row back on any of our commitments to the environment. This government wants to bring forward homes which are truly fit for the future. We don't want to see homes being built in the years ahead that will need to be retrofitted at huge expense either to the state or to individuals in time. We want to ensure that we meet our obligations to the environment, to biodiversity and to the climate change challenge. And that's exactly what the proposals that I intend to publish later this month or the beginning of August will do.
Devon.
Question 22, Mr. Speaker.
Minister Pincher.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We are taking action with the biggest reforms of building and fire safety in nearly 40 years through the Building Safety Bill, which we are publishing in draft form today. To tackle the most urgent problems, we have made available £1.6 billion to remove unsafe cladding systems, so there should be no excuse for further delay. We've made progress. Over two-thirds of high-rise buildings with the most dangerous Grenfell-type ACM cladding have either been completed or they have started their remediation.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With more than 1,000 buildings already having applied to the Building Safety Fund, it is clear that the £1.6 billion will not be anywhere near enough to remedy all high-risk residential buildings still with dangerous cladding more than 3 years after Grenfell Tower fire, and that government is trying to find ways to fit a potential £15 billion liability into a £1.6 billion funding pot. Will the Minister commit to release more funding in line with the Select Committee recommendations to ensure all fire safety defects in every high-risk residential building are addressed, allowing residents to live safely in their homes without fear of bankruptcy?
Minister Pincher.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm obliged to the honourable gentleman for his question. By the 20th of July, I can tell him that we received 1,378 completed registration forms for the Building Safety Fund. We expect that money made available by the Chancellor in this fiscal year to be fully allocated by March, so that those buildings which most need to be remediated and where the people involved, the owners, were not able to act quickly, can be helped. We've always made it clear, Mr. Speaker, that we expect a significant proportion of remediation costs to fall on the shoulders of those responsible for the original work, or the building owners, certainly not on the leaseholders.
Shadow Minister Mike Ainsworth.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. While we finally welcome the publishing of the draft Building Safety Bill today, the Department's own figures highlight the fact that 246 buildings are still wrapped in Grenfell-style cladding, and thousands more are cladded in equally flammable materials. Minister, how will the measures outlined in the Building Safety Bill speed up remediation while increasing the size and the scope of the Building Safety Fund?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. 72% of buildings which had ACM cladding have had that cladding removed. I refer the honourable gentleman to the adjournment debate taken by myself with the honourable lady, the member for Bethnal Green and Bow, and I said that tough enforcement action is on its way for those owners responsible that are not taking action to remediate their buildings. I look forward to working with him as the Building Safety Bill passes through this House and the other place to make sure that we have a good bill fit for purpose. This government's committed to doing so. I trust he will be as well.
Nicola Richards.
Question number 24, please, Mr. Speaker.
Secretary Jenrick.
We have announced a £12 billion investment in affordable homes, the largest in a decade. This will deliver up to 180,000 new affordable homes across England, with the vast majority being delivered by 2026. That's building on our previous £9 billion affordable homes programme, which delivered around 250,000 affordable homes. Figures published last week show the highest number of starts for affordable homes since records began in 2010, and a 91% increase in homes for social rent over the year. We've also extended the previous programme by 1 year to ensure delivery of homes that would otherwise regrettably have been lost because of COVID disruption.
Richards.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister has said that we need to build, 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 and this is absolutely the right approach. So will my right honourable friend join me in praising Bishop Llewellyn Graham and everyone at Nehemiah Housing Association for their amazing work in West Bromwich East? And will he work with them to ensure that local people are skilled up so that we can get the right homes built at affordable prices?
Well, I will join my honourable friend in thanking the Nehemiah Housing Association for their work housing in the West Midlands over the last 20 years. The number of homes built in the West Midlands last year doubled compared to the start of the decade. My honourable friend is right to raise the issue of skills. Delivering the homes this country needs is also dependent on having a skilled workforce. The Construction Industry Training Board have estimated that we will need 688,000 skilled construction workers if we're to deliver our target of 300,000 new homes every year.
Sir Peter Bottomley.
25, Mr Speaker.
Minister Hall.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. We are absolutely committed to reforming the leasehold market and have already set out that we will reduce ground rents to zero on future leases and ban new leasehold houses. We are also working with the Law Commission on enfranchisement, common hold and right to manage. Given the impact of COVID-19 on the agenda and the government's wider work to restart the economy, we will bring forward legislation on leasehold as soon as parliamentary time allows.
Sir Peter.
Mr Speaker, if you and the Minister came to Worthing Station, you would walk past a site where Homes England could help Worthing Borough Council produce extra social housing and more potentially leasehold or common hold homes to my flat, which I have no interest in what I'm going to say. There have been 6 occasions a year on average in the last 10 years when ministers have talked of progress in ending leasehold abuse and providing better homes for the future, as my right honourable friend the Secretary of State said just now. Can we ask that this time there is action, and that could ministers also look to see whether statutory instrument 2020-632 actually takes into account the disbenefits to leaseholders if people put extra storage on leasehold blocks? Thank you, Mr Speaker. Can I thank my honourable friend? I know he has raised issues about this particular statutory instrument. We do believe that we need to encourage densification of our towns and cities to allow for additional homes. In the last 4 years, 60,000 additional homes have been delivered through permitted development rights for change of use, and this new permitted development right could deliver an extra 800 homes a year for families across our cities and help to protect the countryside too. Of course, permitted development rights remain subject to prior approval by the local planning authority on a number of matters, including the impact on the amenity of neighbours and occupiers of the block.
I've got a substantive question to Minister Pincher from Surrey Champion. Minister Pincher.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. As my right honourable friend, and it is grouped, Mr Speaker, with 27, if I can answer both questions together. Thank you. Mr Speaker, as my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State, just mentioned in his response to the honourable member for Huddersfield, this government is committed not just to building better and faster, but greener. As we consider reforms to our planning system, we are committed to ensuring that these create better outcomes for the environment and that decision-making is properly informed by the science. My right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for the Environment, set out this morning our intention to develop a reform framework of environmental assessment and mitigation.
Let's head to Rotherham and visit Sarah Champion. Sarah Champion.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. In 1958, planning permission was granted for dropping well tip in my constituency to open. The local community managed to get the tip closed in the 1990s because of their serious environmental concerns. Now, with no consultation and the vagaries of the planning system, it's been given the go-ahead again. It's likely to reopen in the very near future and is an environmental time bomb. For the last 4 years, I've raised this with the Environment Agency and the government repeatedly, but to no avail. So will the Minister please meet with me to look into this disastrous plan and step in to stop this unwanted and environmentally damaging development?
Minister.
Well, Mr Speaker, I have every sympathy for the honourable lady and her concerns in championing her constituents. I point out to her that in my quasi-judicial role, I'm not able to discuss individual planning matters, but I will refer her concern to my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for the Environment. And of course, if she wishes to talk to me on a broad range of issues, then I'm very happy to do that.
Catherine.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Hounslow Council's new council housing, will no longer be installed with gas boilers, only the newest low-energy systems available. Both the leader of Hounslow, Councillor Steve Curran, and also community organisation Brentford Voice, said that they'd like to see national planning policies require all new developments to incorporate low-emission energy systems. Will the Housing Secretary's reforms require all new homes to be zero carbon, affordable to run, yet still be warm in winter and cool in summer?
I'm obliged to the Honourable Lady, Mr. Speaker. Of course, we were the first government in the world to legislate to be zero carbon by 2050, and we intend to meet that pledge. That is why we have introduced the Future Home Standard to reduce carbon emissions from homes built after 2025 by between 75 and 80%. I'm prepared to listen to and consider all proposals to make us greener and better, and I look forward to hearing those proposals from the Honourable Lady.
Tim Farrell.
28, sir.
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, second homes can bring significant benefits to local areas, including boosting tourism, consumer spending and investment in the local economy. However, we are aware of the need to balance this with the housing needs of local people. We have taken decisive action to address these challenges through the introduction of a stamp duty surcharge on second homes.
Excessive second home ownership robs communities of life, of schools and of other services. Does he understand then why people in the South Lakes are so appalled that the government has chosen to give a £15,000 stamp duty bonus to those lucky enough to be able to afford a second home? When there are 3 million hard-working people excluded from government support at this moment, aren't these appalling priorities? Will he end the second homes bonus and instead support the 3 million excluded?
Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, second home owners contribute significantly to the economy of many parts of our country, particularly those parts that rely on the tourist economy. I'd remind the honourable gentleman that in 2013 we removed the requirement to offer a council tax discount on second homes, and 95% of the 253,000 second home dwellings now have council tax applied to them. It's very important that we balance the needs of the local economy with the rights of local people. We think we've got that balance right as we try to get this country through a very difficult epidemic, and every penny spent locally matters to local businesses and people.
We now come to Topicals with Sally Ann Hart.
Number one, please, Mr. Speaker.
Secretary of State.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This week we announced the most significant reforms to building safety legislation in 40 years, delivering new and enhanced regulatory regimes. And I welcome the voices of all honourable and right honourable members on both sides of the House as we move this critical legislation forwards. Earlier this month, we set out our comprehensive financial plan to ensure that local councils can proceed with their crucial work in confidence, including a one-of-a-kind scheme reimbursing councils for lost income, measures to spread tax deficits and an extra £500 million in unring-fenced funding. And we're also making sure that as we recover from the pandemic, our communities can bounce back with investment in housing, in infrastructure and for our town and city centres. Our recently announced reform of use classes will help to revitalise high streets and town centres, and the Chancellor's stamp duty cut will help many to realise their dream of owning a home.
Sally Ann Hart.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Many councils have had to use emergency accommodation and hotels to house rough sleepers during coronavirus, and as we look to winter, it will not be possible to build enough social housing within the time frame required to ensure people are able to stay off the streets, and many options will need to be considered. For example, social lettings agencies could be established to deal with private rental procurement for vulnerable people and homeless people to access accommodation. All options require funding, so what measures are my right honourable friend considering to keep vulnerable people off the streets come winter?
Well, can I say once again how grateful and proud I am for the work of local councils and homelessness and rough sleeping charities across the country for the remarkable effort that they have made together to protect rough sleepers during the pandemic. That has undoubtedly saved hundreds, if not thousands, of people's lives, and we saw that in the recent ONS statistics that were published, showing that 16 rough sleepers had died in this country during the pandemic. Each of those deaths, of course, is a tragedy, but that is a number far lower than any other major developed country. We're making £105 million available of immediate support for local areas to fund exactly the kind of interventions that she refers to.
We need to get through topicals. We can speed up a little. Janet Davey and Lewisham East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. YourNeighbour.org, a digital platform supporting over 1,300 churches, estimates that faith groups are providing more than 10 million meals a month to people up and down our country who would otherwise go hungry. Our faith groups have missed out on weekly donations and opportunity to raise funds, and they are running out of money and in desperate need of financial assistance. Can the Minister tell me what assessment his government has made of the financial hit to places of worship and why they haven't provided ring-fence support to ensure they can continue their very much needed work?
Well, I pay tribute to the work of faith groups across the country. I've been meeting with faith leaders from all the major religions regularly through our Places of Worship task force. And I'm extremely grateful for the hard work of that organisation that has helped us to reopen Place of Worship safely. I'm aware of the financial impact that the pandemic has had on many places of worship and faith organisations. The schemes created by the Chancellor for charities were open to those from faith organisations, and many have taken part in it.
Steve Double.
Mr. Speaker, town and parish councils across mid-Cornwall have done an incredible job of supporting their communities through this pandemic, going out of their way to provide extra services. As a result, they've incurred extra costs as well as seeing as their income drop because of car parks. I know the government have made money available to Cornwall Council to support these hard-pressed councils, but so far they have declined to pass that on. So would the Minister join me in thanking town and parish councils across the country for all the work they have done in recent months, and what more can the government do to make sure the money they've made available gets to these parish councils?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my honourable friend for his question. There is no question that we have an enormous debt to town and parish councils for everything they've done throughout this pandemic, and we have encouraged principal authorities to discuss the funding provided with their town and parish councils where they are delivering COVID-related services. The grant funding of £3.7 billion is unring-fenced, recognising that local authorities need to make appropriate decisions about how to meet the major COVID-19 service pressures in their local area. I certainly hope Cornwall will give that proper consideration.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Over 820,000 people have already fallen into council tax arrears as a direct result of COVID-19. The expiry of the emergency protection on the 23rd of August will make it worse for vulnerable and struggling families who could face unfair and unsafe bailiff action. Will the Minister consider the introduction of a pre-action protocol to protect them?
We have been for several weeks now in exactly those sorts of conversations with my right honourable friend, the Lord Chancellor, who holds the relationship with the judiciary and with the Master of the Rolls. The Lord Chancellor has already set out today some initiatives, and I'm hopeful that further announcements will be made shortly to provide exactly the kind of protection that she's asking for.
Colbert Carter.
Thank you, Speaker. For a mainly rural large county like Greater Lincolnshire, the effective management of change for local government reform and any devolution is critically important to all businesses and individuals. I'm aware of a recent speech the Minister for Regional Growth and Local Government made and wondered if my honourable friend had anything to add with regard to achieving the best outcome for his parliamentary colleagues and our district and county councils for a right and fair deal for my constituents.
Well, I thank my honourable friend for his question. I had recent constructive discussions with both Lincolnshire MPs and with all Greater Lincolnshire Council leaders on this subject. It is now for them to develop proposals for local government reform, and I'm committed to working with them. Levelling up all areas of the country by devolving money, resources and control from Westminster is a priority for this government, and our devolution and local recovery white paper to be published this autumn will set out our detailed plans, including for restructuring local institutions and establishing more mayors.
Let's head to the North East and speak with Graham Morris. Graham Morris.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, there are sections of my community blighted by absentee landlords, substandard housing, and a total disregard for the need for any tenant vetting. Will the Minister take this opportunity to support the Horden Housing Master Plan in my constituency to regenerate local housing, which could be replicated in neighbouring areas facing the same housing issues and create much needed jobs in the local economy, in construction and the housing industry?
Well, I would be delighted to discuss with the honourable gentleman that master plan and to learn more of its details. It's extremely important to us that not just we build more homes, but we also tackle substandard homes in all parts of the country. That means making them greener, and it means in some cases regenerating parts of towns and cities which desperately need it. And that will be a focus both for our planning reforms and for future investment.
Greg Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With the good news that leisure centres can reopen again from this weekend, my local council, Buckinghamshire Council, has identified over and above the extremely generous and unprecedented level of additional spending for councils, a further £3 million cost pressure from waived management fees, from loss of income from social distancing measures, etc. What assurances can my honourable friend give me that council taxpayers in Buckinghamshire won't be left in the deep end?
Well, I'm extremely pleased that leisure centres will be able to open shortly in a safe and socially distanced manner. The income guarantee scheme that we have already announced will reimburse local councils for 75 pence in the pound for lost income, including for those leisure centres that they own and operate themselves. I appreciate that there are many leisure centres which are not owned and operated by local councils, and I'm working with my right honourable friend, the Culture Secretary, to see what further package of support we might be able to bring forward to assist.
Let's visit Cumbernauld with Stuart C. MacDonald. Stuart C. MacDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Waiting until autumn for details of the Shared Prosperity Fund means huge uncertainty for the recipients of structural funds, loss of staff and expertise, and near impossible transition planning. So can I ask again, why not just guarantee, as a minimum, existing EU funding allocations for next year and do it now?
Secretary of State. Well, as my honourable friend, the Minister for Local Growth, said in his earlier remarks, we made a manifesto commitment to ensure that, at a minimum, each of the nations of the United Kingdom will continue to receive the same amount of funding as they did from within the EU, and we intend to keep that commitment.
Peaceful.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. For many years, I have been working alongside community groups within my constituency at Chidswell, Murfield and Skelmanthorpe, who all have genuine concerns regarding inappropriate developments on farmland, greenbelt and areas susceptible to flooding. Would my right honourable friend agree to meet with me to discuss those concerns?
Well, I'd be happy to meet with the honourable gentleman, who I know campaigns vigorously on these issues, and also to reassure members on both sides of the House that the government intends to bring forward a review of the planning system and how it interrelates with floodplains to ensure that homes are not built irresponsibly on those parts of the country that routinely flood.
Catherine Cutsmith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On the 20th of November, 2 days after meeting Richard Desmond at a Conservative Party fundraising dinner, the Secretary of State's office instructed departmental officials to speed through the West Ferry decision before the date of the new community infrastructure levy came into force. Now, the Secretary of State was informing his officials of this date, so it can't have been them that told him about it. Begs the question, who did?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, the fact that Tower Hamlets Council were preparing a new local plan which included a SIL schedule attached to it was a matter of public record, and anybody who was knowledgeable about London's housing issues would have known that. It's a perfectly legitimate planning consideration to ensure that a decision is made prior to a material change like that, and that's exactly how my officials rightly advise me.
Let's head to Stephen Metcalfe. Stephen Metcalfe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can my right honourable friend tell the House what steps he's taking to ensure that dangerous cladding is removed from high-rise residential buildings and that the assistance is targeted to support leaseholders who face large bills that are preventing them from being able to sell their homes at the moment?
Secretary of State.
Well, we've brought forward the now £1.6 billion fund tackling not just ACM cladding, upon which there's been some progress, but far more progress is required, but also other types of dangerous cladding, such as HPL. And I would strongly encourage buildings to come forward, apply to that fund and get that money out the door. And we have also published, as I said earlier this week, the Building Safety Bill in draft form. And once again, I'd strongly encourage colleagues to participate in ensuring that that bill meets the challenges and radically improves the standards of building safety regulation in this country.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The Western Gateway project has the potential to mean up to £56 billion for the UK economy, benefiting businesses from Swansea to Swindon. So, will ministers commit to work with the new APPG for Western Gateway and the Welsh Government and local authorities to realise the potential of this?
Well, I'm delighted to hear that the Honourable Lady is now chairing the APPG. We were pleased to launch the Western Gateway initiative at the end of last year. I think it has huge potential to drive economic growth in that part of the country, to represent the South West and South Wales on the international stage and attract international investment to her constituency and her neighbours.
Teresa Billy.
My constituency feels like it's under siege from developers trying to build blocks of flats which local infrastructure just hasn't got the capacity to cope with. Will he reduce Barnett's housing target, reform the planning system to end this reckless attempt to urbanise the suburbs?
Well, we're very sensitive to the issues that she's described, and I've had a number of conversations with her already. I appreciate that her constituents have particular concerns about high-rise buildings. We do need to build more homes in London, and that is why we are bringing forward some of the reforms that we've already announced to enable gentle densification, building up on top of people's individual homes or blocks of flats so that homes can be built in a manner which maintains the look and feel of the suburbs.
Clive Efford.
Our local authorities facing a deficit of in excess of £40 million because of its response to COVID. The government said that the council should spend what it takes, so why isn't the government assisting local authorities who have spent that sort of money?
We said at the outset of the crisis that we would ensure that councils have the resources they need, and it's exactly what we're doing. We've now brought forward over £4 billion of funding for COVID-related expenditure. We've also created the income guarantee of 75 pence in the pound for lost income on sales fees and charges, and I'm working with the Chancellor with respect to tax losses so that councils have the confidence to move forward and end the financial year in good financial health.
What will he do to increase the development on brownfield land?
Well, the Chancellor announced the other day our £400 million brownfield fund, which will support projects across the country, and our planning reforms that we've already announced, such as the right to demolish a vacant building and turn it into new housing, is exactly designed for brownfield sites.
Let's head to the North East with Ian Mearns. Ian Mearns. That brings us to the end. In order to allow the safe exit of honourable members participating in this item of business and the safe arrival of those passing the next, I'm suspending the House for 3 minutes. Order.